Hello, welcome. My name is Kate. I am the trans and non-binary officer at Chester Pride. I'm also a trans activist, LGBT rights campaigner, lots of things along those lines too. Um, Welcome to my talk today. So today my talk is titled Blurring the Lines. It's about trans representation and gender expression in music. So it's a bit further than just trans representation. Um, Looking at things like gender stereotypes and how that's influenced people within the music business, but also how people who've been really authentic to themselves and how they've just been able to show them their sort of true and authentic selves through their expression in their art and in their music. I'm also a musician. Right at heart, I'm such a proud musician and music lover, and it's always been a huge sort of part of my life. Um, so much so that I put this talk together about 4 or 5 years ago when I was asked as part of LGBT History Month to basically present it at a few different places around the country. Been quite a lot of different places with this. I think I've been to, oh god, I've been Liverpool, London, Belfast, Birmingham, all sorts of places I've done this talk. And people have been really interested in it because for a lot of folks, there might be a few little things that ring a bell from your own lives and experiences. Anyway, before I start yabbering on too much, if you suddenly see my eyes going left, right, and other places, I've got other screens that I'm referring to some of my notes and my other little bits and pieces. Because no matter how many times I've given this talk, I still forget little bits and pieces. So, actually, before I start, another point is this isn't live, so I can't take direct questions. But if you drop anything in the comments, there's a good chance I can get back and view the playbacks and maybe answer some of your questions on those playbacks on YouTube, Facebook, wherever this ends up going. Okay, so I am going to pop it onto that screen. A couple of times you might see me take my own picture off my little camera in the corner there, just so that you can maybe see an edge of a slide that you couldn't see before. So, welcome to Blurring the Lines, Trans Representation and Gender Expression in Rock Music by me, Kate Hutchinson. If you want to read a bit more about this, there's also a book called Trans Britain. I wrote a chapter in that. There's a little bit about this in there too. Okay, so yeah, going back to me and as a trans person, the first tinglings of my awareness regarding my transness, to use a phrase, were probably around the age of 5 or 6, something like that. It was during break in the playground at school, and I recall standing on my own, looking for friends to play with, and looked over to a bunch of boys playing football, and then a bunch of girls playing. I think they were playing hopscotch, and this was the mid-70s. Everything was super gendered. Hopscotch won. I went to go and play with the girls. And then I was told to leave the girls alone, go and play with the boys because that's what you are. And that didn't make sense to me. And I know these activities are very gender stereotypical, but I had an innate feeling about where I belonged and who I was, so I knew from a very, very early age. But if I ever told anyone about it or ever mentioned that, you know what, actually I'm a girl, people would tease me, would laugh at me, would bully me, would make fun of me, anything like that. So I didn't. I kept it silent. I kept it so quiet. I kept it completely inside. So my childhood marched on. I grew up into adolescence. These sort of feelings of my disconnection with the gender I was assigned at birth sort of grew. Then, sometime in the early 1980s, a thing happened. I remember as an 11-year-old sat in the front room of my parents' house in the northwest of England. That's where I'm from originally. On the Thursday night, engaging in our weekly televisual ritual. Can you guess where it is yet? It's Thursday night. It's 7 o'clock. It's Top of the Pops. Top of the Pops, for anyone who doesn't know, it was a weekly TV show that used to go through whatever was in the music charts that week. You know, it used to play all the sort of latest hits, and it was something we watch every single week without fail because I love my music. You know, and there was all sorts on there, mostly early '80s, lots of pop music, lots of really good pop music. That's where we're going. So I remember sitting there this one night. Apparently this night there was a guy called Shakin' Stevens, used to be a big pop star in the sort of early '80s from Wales. He couldn't make it. I think there was a cancellation, and instead they put a new band on there, a band that hadn't been on it before, a band called Culture Club. And within 5 seconds of them and their singer George appearing on the screen, one of my parents came up with a question. First of all, let's see George, the wonderful boy George. One of my parents, after, well, actually, I think it was both of them, very similar times. They were both sat there in the room. I remember it. They don't remember this. I do. George came on the screen, hat, hair, makeup, you know, ribbons in the hair, looking absolutely amazing. And one of my parents said, "Is that a girl or is that a boy?" Now, for me, as an 11-year-old who was playing around with, you know, was in my head, I didn't know where I was with sort of gender identity. I thought I knew exactly who I was, but I would get people telling me, "No, you can't be like that. That's not right." If all these negative remarks, seeing somebody on TV who was completely authentic to themselves, that made a huge impact. Now, George is a gay man. George is not a trans person. But it was the effect of somebody who was completely 100% authentic to themselves and not caring what anyone else thought about them. That had a huge impact on me as that sort of 11-year-old. You know, here we had George, somebody who you couldn't initially place into one of those binary gender boxes that society loves so much. So yeah, George isn't trans, but see somebody blur lines of gender through their outward expression like that, breaking these stereotypes of what a girl or a boy should look like. That gave me so much to think about. He was just being himself, projecting that through his clothes, his makeup, his hair, and it lit a fire of hope in my heart that maybe someday I could show my true self to the world. For that young kid watching Top of the Pops, that was everything. So, rock and pop music has often been a force that has grabbed people's attention, rocked, shocked, astounded. Often that shock and awe had a deeper impact in changing attitudes. By simple visibility of people breaking the supposed conventions of gender expression, even if the intent to do that was just part of the show, it gave seeds of hope to lots of gender questioning folks, and even camouflage of sorts for some, as it did with for me, with those expressing their own gender identity. Let's look at it this way. This didn't start with people breaking gender stereotypes in the '80s like George. Trans people, despite the huge increase in awareness in the last few years, we're nothing new. Trans folks, we've been here on the planet as, let's see, as long as everyone. As long as there's been people, there's been trans people. We walk among you. Yeah, it's true. Therefore, there's always been trans folks involved in popular music. Whether that took the form of being the subject of lyrics by non-trans musicians, or by being out there and visible under the radar by maybe projecting their gender expression out there but not really coming out as trans. Yeah, we've always been there, and in recent years we've seen more and more people coming out as trans and emerging as themselves. Ones I can really think of a big in a big way is maybe Laura Jane Grace of Against Me. He comes out. Also had people like Anoni as well. Yeah, there's God, there's so many, and trans people have always been here in popular music. I'm going to name a few more before we talk about the slide. You can see sort of there with those words on, and you can guess where those words are from, can't you? We're going to talk about that in a minute. um, but there's been many trans musicians, and I'm not going to go through everyone, and I'm bound to miss some out. Um, I'm talking mostly from my viewpoint as a kid who was born in 1970, grew to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and is still around now. 50 years old. Wow. Um, just seeing the things that influenced me, maybe the people who were being true to themselves, and how that influenced me and inspired me. Um, so I want to mention a few that I haven't really got time to massively weave into this story, but I'm sure I'll miss the odd person out. I want to mention Sharon Cohen. Sharon Cohen, you might know her better as Donna International, one of Israel's most successful music acts ever, and a Eurovision Song Contest winner and trans. I want to also mention Billy Tipton, an American jazz musician and band leader. Billy Tipton was out there. Well, I don't think. Well, nobody ever knew Billy Tipton was trans at the time, but Billy Tipton was another trans person. Go look him up. There's a great book about him. Also, the fantastic, the amazing Wendy Carlos, a musician who was instrumental. Crap joke. In the development of electronic music and the Moog synthesizer. She released an album called Switched On Back. That was the second classical album ever to sell over 1 million copies. I had to get my stats off my sheet here, and won 2 Grammy Awards for it in 1970. People seem to forget about her achievements. I mean, I think it was the music from Tron and stuff from The Shining as well. I'm not sure about Clockwork Orange. I might be wrong with that one, but she was involved in a lot of very early experimental music, and she was absolutely amazing. People forget a lot about her. She was out as trans quite, earlyish on in her career. At one point, though, she'd transitioned, but she was still found. She still found that she pressured herself to appear as male when she was being maybe interviewed for a magazine or a TV interview. So she used to stick on like sideburns to try and appear as a role that she wasn't, because she didn't know whether people would accept her or not. She soon enough did come out and quite publicly, and then just carries on and lives a life as she is, and was a very successful, inspirational musician to many. So that was 1970. She won those Grammy Awards. I was born in that year. So trans folks, we've always been here, but I'm going to start my story in New York City in the late 1960s, which ties in to this as well. This song is the first song I ever heard that mentioned trans people specifically, and real trans people. Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed. Holly came from Miami, FLA, hitchhiked her way across the USA, plucked her eyebrows on the way, shaved her legs, and then he was a she. She said, "Hey babe, take a walk on the wild side." He said, "Hey honey, take a walk on the wild side." I just want to now go do 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 do, but I won't. But I did. Holly, who's mentioned in that song, in those lyrics there, was a real person, was in fact Holly Woodlawn, one of Andy Warhol's superstars. Holly did indeed come from Miami, hitchhiked across the USA to sort of embrace her true self and become one of those stars, the Warhol superstars. The song mentions 2 other trans women. It mentions Candy Darling and Jackie Curtis, who are both part of that scene. Anyone out there know who produced this song? Who produced this song? I was going to say stick it in the chat, but it's not live, so I can't answer there and then. I need a drink too. Excuse me. Need coffee. Okay, give it a go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time up. Okay. The person who produced that song was David Bowie. More about him in a bit. Back then, when this song came out, they didn't really use the terminology trans. A lot of the language was different. They might refer to each other as queens, and for a lot of them, they identified maybe as queens or as drag queens. But a lot of the people from that scene went on to specifically identify as trans. So they were trans people using different language of the day, or language that fit for them maybe at that particular time. You know, a lot of those people from that scene may have been medically transitioning, but still maybe using terms like queen to refer to themselves and using female hormones. Using female hormones, did I? Yeah, I said medically transition. You know, basically so they could feel comfortable in their identity. So they may well have been transitioning as we would see medically now. Anyway, so Holly Woodlawn at one point was, as far as I remember from the book I read from Jane's book, Jane County, was sharing an apartment with another performer by the name of Jane County. Now, Jane was going by a different stage name at this point. Was going by the stage name of Wayne County. Had a band. Well, no, I'm jumping ahead of myself again. Jane was performing in films and plays, part of that whole scene, you know, in New York. She was part of the ridiculous theatre company that staged plays that influenced lots of different future productions, even things like, you know, the Rocky Horror Show up to a point, but they were a lot more wild, I suppose, than the Rocky Horror Show from what I've read about them. But these shows also experienced music performers with through their exaggerated image in these plays and an expression. So people like David Bowie and Ray Davies of the Kinks were some of those ones who saw these early productions. Jane County talks about this quite a lot in her book, Man Enough to Be a Woman. She talks about Bowie and Ray Davies coming to some of the shows she was in. Now, Jane, at her heart, she was a music lover. I've got a picture of Jane somewhere. Where have we? That's Jane. It's an older picture of Jane. Jane at heart was a rocker and a music lover. She was the first trans rocker I ever heard about as a kid. She'd taken part in the fringes of the Stonewall riots, as far as I remember. She was sort of around that area at the time all of that went on. And she, to me, was so rock and roll. She showed me a person who wasn't really hiding her true self. She'd moved from Atlanta originally to New York to just go find her own path with things. She got to a point where she decided she'd had enough of all the theatre production thing and started putting a series of rock and roll bands together because that's where her heart really lay. So this was New York in the 1970s and the early 1970s now. So we're talking about bands such as the New York Dolls, who you can see there. They were really tearing up these rules of gender. Rules of gender with satin, makeup, teased hair. They played songs of hard and fast rock and roll that mirrored their lifestyles. Here was a band that were doing punk and glam before there was punk and glam. They were grabbing attention and they went on to influence so many bands of the punk, glam and even hair metal scene in the late 80s, early 90s. Bands like Slade from the UK in some level were influenced by bands like the Dolls, the Ramones, Guns N' Roses. So you can see there these pictures of the Dolls there. It's so powerful that breaking all of those sort of gender expression stereotypes of what boys in a band should be doing or what girls in a band should be doing. They were doing their thing. They were just purely sort of something else and inspirational. Now, Jane moved to the UK in the mid-1970s after hearing about the rising punk scene here, I'm trying to see what we've got. No, we got a different picture there. We'll get to that in a second. um, so Jane, Jane moved to the UK. She heard about the punk scene over here, and she started touring extensively. Every club, pub, wherever around the UK that she could get her shows in. Her shows were attended by folks such as Pete Burns, Holly Johnson, Boy George, who we saw earlier, who have gone on to name check Jane as an influence, or she's popped up in a few of their sort of biographies before now. Quite often hear stories of about Jane playing Eric's in Liverpool, and these folks, some of these folks who are Liverpool-based musicians, go into those shows. And some of those who went on to have really successful music careers. And that bit of influence of Jane's image and attitude can plainly be seen. In the mid-70s, glam rock was at its peak as well, in about 1975. In the UK as well, I mean, that was so influenced by a lot of the American art rock scene and those New York scene bands. So Mark Bolan and T-Rex, The Sweet, Slade, Roxy Music, Bowie, they were all influenced by those bands like The Dolls, Lou Reed, Iggy Pop. And these were also all bands that picked up those thoughts about expression and breaking those stereotypes, blurring those lines of gender expression. It just basically erased those borders of gender expression through those onstage images and personas. Some of those really powerful sort of album covers and photographs from the era. It wasn't just the guys breaking these stereotypes though too. We had all female rock bands appearing, so you can see there we've got Susie Quattro and Joan Jett. Joan was in an all-girl band called the Runaways. They were an amazing band. I mean, look at Joan there. It's such a powerful image. She's basically like jeans, t-shirt, leather jacket, guitar slung low, so rock and roll. Susie in the whole black leather thing with the bass, slinging that bass, fronting a band which were all guys in a backing band, and she was up there right up front. And the songs they were singing as well, they were quite often songs of sort of empowerment. They were songs about them being the one up there, taking charge, doing what she wanted to do. They didn't fit any of the images that the music business loved at the time of maybe the pop princess, the very feminine expression and songs and lyrics that would fit in with that. These were powerful women, grabbing their power, throwing away those rules of gender expression, and just rocking out and being who the hell they wanted to be. Susie Quattro, probably one of my huge inspirations as far as a musician. Probably one of the reasons I picked up bass guitar along with a bunch of others. She absolutely rocks and still does to this day. Now I'm going to go on to somebody else. Now this guy. David Bowie. Bowie had seen Andy Warhol's play Pork when he visited London in 1971. It had a cast at the time that included Jane County. Bowie also included a song about Warhol on Hunky Dory in 71. That's also when his Ziggy Stardust persona appeared. What can I say about David Bowie? What can't I say about David Bowie? When Bowie wore a dress on the cover of his album The Man Who Sold the World, he made a big statement there about gender and expression. It was a statement that his American record label couldn't really handle at the time, as they declined the cover and went with an alternate one, which I think I've got a copy of there. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't get past there was a guy in a dress on an album cover. Eventually, I know it was reissued with the good cover, and it's been issued with a fair few different covers. But Bowie was a musician that meant actually so much to me, and still does. But he meant so much to a whole generation of trans folks. Again, not a trans person, just somebody who didn't let rules of how you express yourself apply to him. Gender expression, yeah, throw it out the window. Rules of that, throw it out the window. About being true to yourself and about expressing yourself no matter what anyone else around you thought or how they may judge you. He was absolutely revolutionary when it came to that. He was a person who never fit into society's neat little boxes, categorizing people by gender or sexuality. Words that have been used to describe him include changeling, chameleon, visionary, and innovator. He showed how gender can be fluid. He took expression, gender, and sexuality, he shaped it, he moulded it into something that was uniquely him. Constantly shifting with his identity, he wasn't constrained by the society's rigid opinions on how people should look, how they should sound, how they should love. He was pure inspiration and hope to me. He's a role model to me still to this day. A kid who didn't fit in the role that society was trying to push me into, or that, into the role that I was expected to. So, going back to punk, in the mid-70s, it was making huge waves. Jane found, going back to Jane County found her home comfortably in that whole London punk scene, sharing a flat in Wardour Street in Soho with others from that scene. So many exciting new bands and a whole movement that played with expression and image, purposefully rebelling on what society would consider, I hate this word, normal. The dawn of industrial music as well. Bands like Throbbing Gristle, with Genesis in Throbbing Gristle, who also came out as quite gender non-conforming, with a bit of a trans identity too. Going then into the late 70s and 80s, it gave way to new wave, and especially in the UK, the New Romantics. Spawning acts like, as you see in this picture, Boy George there on the right, Culture Club, Steve Strange and Visage, who again both push people's perceptions of gender. David Bowie actually used Steve Strange and people who are part of the Blitz Club, which is a London club, a London New Romantic Club. He used people from that club in his Ashes to Ashes video. And the whole New Romantic scene is another scene I know for a fact was a place where a lot of trans friends who are a little bit older than me say that they found a bit of a haven and a safe place to find their own expression before they came out. So quite often, again, that thought of music and expression being a safe place for a lot of people to explore their own identities and their expressions before stepping out a little bit wider and being a bit more public maybe about their identities. As the 80s moved on, other musical subcultures appeared with different expressions, such as goths and the goth subculture in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, and a lot of that community also lapped over with the queer community and pagan community. I've still got a lot of friends from the sort of queer community generally who are part of that whole goth community too. I was pretty much part of that community too on some level as well, as far as image and music taste went. You would get massively different types of expression in within that subculture. You would get a lot of men wearing quite androgynous or feminine quite clothing and makeup, and some just some fantastic, amazing expression within that subculture, and some great bands as well. Bands like Bauhaus and Susie and The Mission, Sisters of Mercy. Yeah, even bands like Christian Death as well. So then there was sort of an evolution that came on, sort of moving further on into the 80s, of glam rock, which was something that really struck a chord with me at the time. This was hair metal. They didn't call it hair metal at the time. I used to call it glam metal. Where artists took on, quite often, very male dominated with a lot of the bands. You would get these bands that would take on an image of big backcombed long hair, lots of makeup, very feminine expression in clothing as well. Thing is that image and that expression was quite opposite to some of the lyrics in the music at the time as well. It was, to be honest, it was pretty, at times, very problematic and quite misogynistic lyrics in these bands, from these sort of all male bands. There were female bands within that scene as well, but very much in the minority. But it's within that sort of scene I found my comfort zone as probably at the time a 15, 16-year-old kid, trying to find a way of expressing myself and not being judged or outed as a trans person at the time. So it was with 80s hair metal that I found my way to start. I exploring my own gender. So I had the big backcombed hair. I started to grow my hair. I went from being the kid with the short hair, being the army cadet, playing rugby, trying to fit in one mold. Like, I was really trying to not be that. I had so much internalized stuff going on in my identity. I was trying not to be that trans person. And then I went from that to, let's start playing with my identity. Let's start playing with my expression. And yeah, this feels good. This feels like it's me. So I grew my hair long, spent many hours of my time learning my trade as a musician. Still not very good today, but I found a huge love for it. Sat in my room playing guitar, started playing in bands, and with that came an excuse and camouflage to explore my identity even more. So started wearing jewellery, ears pierced, makeup. To the world, I was just this wacky glam rocker, but to me it was wonderful to express my femininity in that outward but also strangely stealthy way, hiding in plain sight, you could say. I would get hassle for being the glam rocker, but I wasn't getting hassle for being a trans person, which was me at the time, dealing probably with a lot of my internalized negative feelings about myself. Many years later, I heard that a number of musicians who were part of that scene came out as trans. There were people like Marcy Free, who was in King Cobra, Jackie Yanks of Warrior, and Rhino Bucket. Great band name. It was the 80s. I think I've got some other pictures, actually. Yeah, so the first band you saw there, actually going back a slide, that's Poison. That's Pretty Boy Floyd. And yeah, they were bands of my teenage years. So yeah, I was that teen in the 80s. I was really struggling with my identity, and the only things I ever generally saw about trans people were the tabloid press. And it was the typical sex swap shocker, headlines that usually mocked trans people and mocked the person involved. It was all about sensationalism, the shock factor, while at the centre of those stories, there was a person just struggling to be accepted for who they actually were. But then when I started hearing hearing tales of trans folks in songs. Walk on the Wild Side, Lola by the Kinks, even. When I heard about Jane County standing up and proudly singing about being man enough to be a woman. When I saw Boy George, and when I discovered Bowie, whoa, whoa, it gave me hope. These were people who didn't want your pity. These folks were empowered. These folks were being true to themselves. Whether trans or cis, they didn't give a damn about what you thought about their clothing or expression. They were rock and roll. Because at its heart, rock and roll music is about being true to yourself. It's about rebelling against those who want to put you in a box and that fits their view of the world. In a 1999 interview with Jeremy Paxman, it's out there, it's on YouTube, I found it in the research for this, Bowie spoke about how he wanted to be a musician because it was rebellious and he thought that it really could affect change to a form. Here's a couple of my great favourite Bowie lyrics and stuff that's again played with gender. You've got your mother in a whirl. She's not sure if you're a boy or a girl, from Rebel Rebel. Music is inspirational. It can drive us, it can lift our spirits, it gives us hope, it consoles us when we feel low, it can empower us. In the words of David Bowie, again, you might have accidentally seen when I put this one up. We can be heroes each and every day, every last one of us. Just being yourself, just standing up and being true to yourself, your expression, who you are. That can be one of the most powerful statements you can ever make in a world that tries to push your identity away and push your identity down. Simply existing and being true in your existence is a strong political statement, a strong statement about being yourself. If it wasn't for music, I definitely would not have had the strength to tackle transition. But hearing those songs that mention trans people, or songs that just played with gender, sometimes written by trans folks, sometimes not, they always made me feel less alone. The Kinks, when they had a song there, Lola, when Coca-Cola actually asked for their name to be taken off it, as far as I can remember, and they changed it to Cherry Cola. There are two different versions out there. One's got Coca-Cola in it, one's got Cherry Cola in it. Good there. Start again. Girls will be boys and boys will be girls. It's a mixed up, muddled up, shook up world, except for Lola. Lola. Lola, it was apparently inspired by a date one of the band had with a trans person. I think Jane County talks a lot about sort of Ray Davies and the Kinks in a book, Man Enough to Be a Woman. Also, non-trans thing, but really important lyrics these were to me actually in 1998 when I was just around coming out the first time I was looking at transition. On their 1998 album, This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours, the Manic Street Preachers recorded a song called Born a Girl. Now, I don't know what the intentions of whoever wrote this song actually are within the band, but these lyrics sang out to me so much. The lyrics are not altogether positive and inspirational in that way, but they gave comfort that I wasn't the only one who felt like this. Maybe they showed a level of understanding, that an empathy that I hadn't seen before in in lyrics about trans people. I'm going to read some of these lyrics, so bear with me. Do I look good for you tonight? Will you accuse me as I hide behind these layers of disguise? and the mirrors of my own happiness. I'm not reading them in exactly the same tone as you get them in. I've loved the freedom of being inside. Need a new start and a different time. Something grows in this space between me and it's twisting this fragile body. Wow, these really did hit home at the time. I was going through a lot of anguish at the time about whether I should come out or not. And I wish I had been born a girl instead of what I am. Yes, I wish I'd been born a girl and not this mess of a man. The censorship of my skin is screaming inside and from within. There's no room in this world for a girl like me. No place there where I fit in. And then we've got Jane County's Man Enough to Be a Woman. Very just strong lyrics like, I'm trans, I'm me, yeah. Yeah. It was just a real shoulder swagger moment when I think I saw these lyrics. I got a transsexual feeling. It's hard to be true to the one who's really you. I got a scandalous feeling. It's hard to be true when they point and stare at you. Conditioned to portraying the mask of masculinity. Another blend of different shading. I am what I am. I don't give a damn. Wow. Ironically, when I got to that point in my life where I decided to transition, I was playing in a band that I'd been in for 5 years and I loved. Not from this picture. I decided I needed to quit playing that in that band, and I decided the thing that had helped me get through everything would now actually become a hindrance because I made a prejudgment of the guys I was in the band with. It was an all male beards and beer bellies is a great way I would describe it, as a rock band, that they wouldn't accept me. I got it into my head that they'd all laugh, point, shout at me, do whatever, and I quit. It was a sacrifice I needed to make at the time. I felt like a part of me had died. I walked away from music. Turned out wrong, but I quit. A few months later, music came back to me to help empower me and help me through my transition. One of my best friends in the world ever, hey Sarah, hey Paul, approached me to come and join their band, and I did, and it was a scary thing to do at the moment. At that time, early in my transition, I was worried about the things mentioned earlier, that getting up back on stage, how would people react to me? But getting on that stage for those first times with friends around me and lots of other friends from the music community locally where I live, that really got me through a huge chunk. Music got me through a huge part of my early transition, just from other people in the music community and fantastic allies who I was standing by me and with me when we were on those stages. So we're getting more trans people coming out. Folks like Anoni, who was nominated, funnily enough, before they came out with a trans identity, non-binary identity, I think. I think, were nominated for a Brit Award once before they came out as trans, and then they were nominated for a Brit Award after they came out. Maybe one of the only people to have that type of honour. I don't know. And Jane moved back to Atlanta. Jane is still being her awesome punk rock self. Jane's still making music. She's still putting singles out. She had a single out very recently, so you can probably check her out if you search for Jane County, Jayne County. She'll be on YouTube, and she's awesome. She really is. Huge inspiration to me. There's also people like Against Me, bands like Against Me, with people like Laura Jane Grace. Here's somebody again who inspired me in a big way. Getting up on stage as a trans person, I was really worried about getting on a microphone and my voice and how people may judge me. That wasn't until I saw Laura Jane Grace absolutely owning it on stage, just singing full with all of her voice and so powerful. It's that inspiration. And we're talking about trans visibility and inspiration and the importance of that visibility. Again, to me, that gave us songs like Transgender Dysphoria Blues with amazingly powerful lyrics. Um, you know, very true, very insightful lyrics. Um, some of the words they you want them to see you like they see every other girl. They just see a faggot. They'll hold their breath, not to catch the sick. You only got the tiny little corner cut off there by my picture. Also, True Trans Soul Rebel, another great song by them. God bless your transsexual heart. Songs that give comfort that you're not the only one, that there are others out there like you. Power of art, poetry, music, the written word, visible role models. It should never ever be underestimated. Everybody needs inspiration. Music, authenticity is mine. It's my inspiration. What's yours? We all have it. What's yours? I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed this retelling of this, because I haven't told this story for so long. This snapshot of trans folks in rock and people just not letting any gender stereotypes stop them in how they express themselves to the world. We've just looked at a couple here. There's so many more. As the years go on since I wrote this talk, we see so many more people coming out, and they've always been there right through history. You know, we see different people and their gender expression and their identities expressed out there. And that visibility, it inspires. It inspired me. It will inspire people to go on as long as there are people on this planet doing what they do, doing what they love. So I hope you've enjoyed this little snapshot. I've enjoyed sharing it and bits of my life. So do what you love what you do, and don't give a damn about what anyone else thinks. Be true, rock it. Find your inspirations, use them to help realize your dreams. Rock your authentic self, and you might inspire somebody else to live their truth too. I'll leave you with this. Words of David Bowie. Tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming. Thank you. Have a good day. Goodbye.